Good evening, Jayant. How are you, Kaveri?
All well, Kanal Sahab, all good. Looking forward to this.
Okay, all okay?
All okay, thank you.
Yeah, Kaveri, with this, I was seeing this wonderful audio-visual on Ireland, Wilderness Ireland. Why is it? Why this tagline?
I think it is because the footage was actually from in the coastal path that runs a coastal. How would I describe it? It's a roadway, a walkway. You can cycle it, and it's called the Wild Atlantic Way. It's a coastal path that runs down the coast of Ireland from north to south, and then further down east as well. And I think it was just a representation of that. I have to say, my heart just filled with absolute pride to see Ireland being shown off so beautifully, so beautifully.
Yeah, that there is a smile on your face, and in your writing also there is a lot of positive vibes about Ireland. Tell me, are there still no snakes in Ireland? I remember reading a short story by Frederick Fawcett some years back, in which it was titled "There are no snakes in Ireland." Does it hold good till now?
Absolutely, there are no snakes in Ireland until maybe a month and a half ago, when much to a housewife in Cork, I think it was, much to her shock, a consignment of marble from Agra, from India, arrived, and in it, out of that came a very venomous snake, and her son, I think only 7 years old, discovered it, and it made headline news. But otherwise, no snakes in Ireland.
Okay. Navtej and me have one thing in common. Both of us were born in Jalandhar. In fact, we all three of us have a thing in common about Jalandhar, because in The Tainted, that is your latest novel, the plot is set in Jalandhar. Am I right?
Yes, I mean, the actual mutiny of the Connacht Rangers, has a connection with Jalandhar. But of course, I fictionalized the regiment when I wrote the book, and I set it actually in the Nilgiris. But yes, I mean, Jalandhar has a huge connection to the mutiny.
Yeah, and my end sources say that we also share an interesting sport called golf.
That's right. Colonel Saab, you have to come to Ireland. We have the most wonderful golf courses here, as you know.
I know. I'm very fond of Rory McIlroy, and Ireland has got some wonderful courses, and the weather is so good. Let's see. Okay, we'll start off this session of Literati 2020 titled Tracing Footsteps. And before we get on with your particular works, can I request you, Navtej, to tell us how did this fascinating journey of being an author and a writer start, especially in your case when you were a career diplomat? And one can imagine the kind of commitment they have, and the travel that they do, and tight row, especially in your case where you were for 6 years the face of the government, the official spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you took time off writing your Tales of Poland, I think was published in 1991. Could you tell everybody about your journey, this fascinating journey of writing?
Well, thank you, Avnish. Yes, it has been a fascinating journey. I wouldn't change a day of it. And it's not been easy, because you're balancing basically two vocations, two almost full-time careers, as it happened in my case. Of course, my main career was diplomacy and the Indian Foreign Service, but I began writing before I became a diplomat. So I was writing. I was a journalist in the 70s. I was a university correspondent for the one-time famous evening news of the Hindustan Times. And I was writing feature pieces and book reviews and all that, even from my university days. So when I did join the Foreign Service, I think one of the reasons actually was that it wouldn't compete with my writing in the sense, and I found it that if you played it right and you wrote the right kind of things, you didn't have to write politics or foreign policy. And if you didn't do that, then it gives you enough space. It gave you enough experience. It gave you exposure to different cultures, different people. It really broadened your horizons, and so that actually helped my writing, and my writing helped my diplomacy, because again, you're playing with, your tools are your words in both the profession. So I think the diplomacy was strengthened by the fact that I was into the written word and reading and writing. So that's how it happened. And during the career, I started writing. I wrote journalism. I wrote short stories, but nobody would print the short stories because they said you need to write a novel. So I wrote my first novel, which was We Weren't Lovers Like That, in 2003. And the short stories kept coming out in different magazines. And finally, they came out as a collection, Winter Evenings, in 2012. And alongside that, after my first novel, I wrote another novel, which was mentioned, The Exile. I wrote a travel history. I wrote essay books, and and a collection of essays, and I did some translations. So again, it was a question of finding the time in 24 hours to do everything. And as somebody from the army, you would know that you count your day in minutes and seconds. So similarly, here also, I have always counted my day in minutes and seconds and seen how much I can squeeze into it.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's very. And Cauvery, you are not a literature student. What I know is that you did eco, and you were. Your father was in the army. Of course, you would have traveled a lot in India. And I personally, I find that any lady who's not working is busier than a fellow or a lady who's working, because she has to manage everything. You manage your husband, you've got 3 children, you migrated from India, and you are 33 years now into Ireland, and you have some really time consuming hobbies like golf and gardening, and still you find time. Let's hear from you. How's this fascinating journey of yours?
Well, I'm not a very disciplined writer. There's a lot of procrastination that goes on in my life on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, how I managed to write 3 books, I think, my whole family just thinks it's a miracle. But, I've been very lucky, Colonel Sab. My husband is extremely supportive. I mean, he's, like beyond the call of duty, supportive of my writing. And, we've always had a very equal marriage. And I think that really adds, that really helps you as a writer, because you're never guilty then. You don't feel that, I'm writing, I should be cooking, or, because, if I have a good writing day and I haven't cooked, it's never an issue. So I think having a supportive partner is very helpful, in anybody's writing journey, whether you're a man or a woman. So that was a huge help to me. And I started my writing career when after my children were born, and my kids they've been good kids. They've as they grew older, they were very appreciative of the fact that that their mother was writing, and if I was in the zone, as you'd call it, they would be very sort of respectful of that. So that's that's a great thing. I mean, I have my family right behind me, and I have to thank them for it. So that's my story anyway.
And your first novel, The Paddy Indian, it's out and out your love for your new country, and your experience of migrating from your host country, your home, different environment, culture altogether. Tell us something about, briefly about The Paddy Indian.
So, Colonel, when we arrived in Ireland in 1986, we came straight from Madras, from Chennai, to a very, very small rural town in a rural county, called Sligo, and we lived in Sligo town in County Sligo, and far from, when we were growing up in India, you had this notion of what the West was going to be like. It was all going to be just sex, drugs, rock and roll, and then we arrived in Sligo, which was so ultra conservative. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how conservative Ireland was compared to India, in 1986, because obviously the church had a fairly strong influence on the country, and it was a culture shock, but actually nearly in reverse, because we were expecting one thing and it turned out to be exactly the opposite. But the love for Ireland just came, I think, just the people are really lovely. The country is just so utterly beautiful. I mean, you have to just come to Ireland to see how very beautiful it is. And I know Navtej was in Belfast, because I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival and heard him speak. And I'm not quite sure whether he had an opportunity to see Northern Ireland at all. But I mean, even Northern Ireland is just so stunningly beautiful. The coast and inland, the mountains, the lakes. It's just a wonderful country. And I think for myself and Prakash, coming from Chennai, which was a city of 9 million when we left, to come to, at that time, Ireland only had barely 4 million people, so it's sparsely populated and so beautiful. It was absolutely fabulous. We loved it, and we've loved it ever since.
Great. Navtej, yours is a wide canvas of work, fiction, non-fiction, history, travel. And the first work of yours, what is that? We Weren't Lovers Like That. Was ironically the only fiction so far, but from my own sources, I gathered that now you are more inclined towards writing some more fiction. Now, this particular novel, I somehow got a feeling that it was the guy who was the main character was a little despondent with his life, and he wanted to get back in time, and that is the kind of story that it was.
Well, yeah, thank you for taking me back to that. But I must say that that's not the only work of fiction. The Exile is a work of historical fiction, and Winter Evenings is a collection of short stories, which I hope will be regarded as fiction.
Of course,
so all these are fiction, 3 books. Yes, We Weren't Lovers Like That was my first novel, and it was set. It was written around the turn of the century, around the millennium, actually turn of the millennium, and it was about a 40-year-old person who suddenly finds life sort of slipping away from his fingers like a bar of soap, and everything is crumbling around him. His wife leaves him with their only son because she prefers one of his good friends. And he is having problems in office. He can't sort of relate to the kind of changes that have come in office politics, etc. So he then just goes into a journey which is as much into his future as into his past. So the whole book is structured around a little train journey from Delhi to Dehradun by the Shatabdi Express, which, as you would know, takes about 5 or 6, 7 hours. So in that journey, he is actually reliving important aspects of his life, and he is also going towards a hope of recovering, recouping a lost love, which hopefully will meet him in the end. The book really doesn't tell you if he does or doesn't, but there is that sense of hope at the end. So in a way, it's about lost opportunities. It's about regrets. It's despondent to begin with, but then it's also the journey of coming out of that despondency, which the book describes. So I really enjoyed writing that book. It was a very freeing experience.
Oh, that's nice. And what is the next project on a fiction novel?
Well,
And I mean, you know what?
I don't know if it will become a novel or not, but certainly I have tried to finish what I have tried to finish. It's a largish work on the Punjab of 100 years ago. It's a book of fiction set around the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, but not about the massacre alone. It brings in a lot of other things that were happening in the Punjab 100 years ago: the return of the First World War soldiers, the Gadar revolutionaries, the revival of the cultural religious institutions, the building of the canals by the British, all that was having a socio-economic impact, plus into which came the freedom struggle, the satyagrah, and the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh in 1919. So that is, again, a work of fiction based on a historical event. As you know, Cauvery would relate to this, how you take an event and then you sort of fictionalize things around it. And that's what that book is. It is still not been taken by a publisher, so hopefully we'll hear soon.
Great, great. I think it should be very interesting. Cauvery, now this, personally, purely personally, the uncoupling. I got an impression that it is talking of redundancy of orthodox arranged marriage, Indian arranged marriage, and in the wake of greener pastures, it is further deteriorating. And what do you have to say about this? I may be wrong.
Well, I tell you, Colonel Saab, I started writing the book. It was to be a critique of the Indian marriage, of the arranged marriage. But as I wrote the book, the main character was to be a villain. Like, he was to be, I was going to castigate him. But as I wrote the book, I ended up being quite sympathetic to him. And it was a very strange thing. I didn't set out to write a book that was going to be sympathetic to the man in the arranged marriage, but that's how it ended up. And in the end, it was actually very sort of. I think I actually made a case for arranged marriage, rather than the other way around, which was unexpected even for me as a writer. It's just sometimes your character just makes you do strange things, I think. So.
Yeah, I could make that out. Navtej, your book on Nanak is really, I must confess, has inspired a lot of people to dig deeper into his teachings and his travel. Because the other day also I was mentioning to you that this came about in the Military Literature Festival last year on the 550th anniversary. And it was really interesting, a great eye-opener. Maybe have some excerpts of his teachings and their relevance, please. I mean, for our viewers to listen to it.
Well, this is the book. So, it's I didn't expect to do a reading from it, but I can tell you that this is a very sort of simple, straightforward book, which was essentially written in a period of 3 or 4 months and it was meant for the lay reader who knows nothing about Guru Nanak and then picks up this book and should get a fair idea of his life and teaching. So I think essentially what this book brings out is the context of Guru Nanak. When he came into this world, what was happening. There was a time of heavy ritualism. There was discrimination. It was a caste-ridden society. It was a superstition-ridden society. And he traveled a lot. He traveled in 4 different directions. And it's fairly well known that he went as far north as Tibet. Even if we take the most conservative travel estimates, he went east up to Assam. He went south up to present-day Sri Lanka, and he went west. He went west certainly up to Mecca, Medina. Of course, there are thoughts and there are stories that he went to Jerusalem and he went to Turkey and all that, but that has not been proven, so to speak. So these four major journeys or udasis he did do, and everywhere it was to show essential things like the oneness of God, the equality of man, the right way to worship, to move away. Why are you worshiping in a way that you are? What does it actually mean to go away from ritual and go to the core of the teachings of every religion? It was not against any religion, whether it was Hinduism or Islam. He just went and debated with the holy men of all religions to show them that what is the real way of going into life, going about life. And the critical teaching was that God is not to be found by running away from this world. He's not to be found in forests and mountains and caves and so on. You have to live in this world because this is God's creation. And you have to live in the right way. And you have to, as the three basic things go, you have to work hard, you have to remember his name, and you have to share in charity. So the last 20 years of his life, he came back after his travels, settled down in Kartarpur on the banks of the river Ravi. Now you hear a lot about Kartarpur Sahib, which falls on the other side of the border. And he lived like a householder. He farmed the land. He got a community together who would, sing the praises of God. He started the communal kitchen of the langar, and so on and so forth. So it was really a practical way, a practical religion, as it was called. This was religion as anubhav, how to live life in the right way. So that, in very short, is something. Of course, one can go on for hours about this, but this is what this book tried to capture in very simple language, and I'm glad that this book survived up to the 550th anniversary of its birth last year, and it's now also come out in Hindi as well as in Punjabi.
Yeah, one of our viewers, Akashdeep Gill, is asking you, Navtej, is the visit of Guru Nanak to Jerusalem authentic?
I have spent a lot of time in Jerusalem, and one of my books, that's Indians at Herod's Gate, is about the Sufi Khanka, or the Indian hospice that became, which goes back to the time of Baba Sheikh Farid, who went from Punjab and meditated in a cellar there. And my book is about that Indian hospice. And to bring it back to your question, my thought was the same, that if Guru Nanak went to Hajj, to Mecca, Medina, and this is the route that the pilgrims used to take, they would often go by ship or boat from Karachi to Jeddah and then to the Hajj, and then come back through Jerusalem, Baghdad, by land. So he's documented to have gone to Baghdad. And he went to Mecca, Medina. Whether or not he went to Jerusalem, I was unable to find anything. My hope, it was more a hope than anything else, and it perhaps wishful thinking, or just instinct, was that if he had gone to Jerusalem, as a lot of holy men used to go in those days, then where would he have gone in Jerusalem? He would have gone to the Indian corner. He would have gone to the place of Baba Farid, because Baba Farid's couplets are included in the Granth Sahib. So there are 100-odd couplets of Baba Farid which are included in the Granth Sahib. So he was familiar, not that he put together the Granth Sahib, but certainly he was familiar with the teachings of Baba Farid, because Baba Farid was a big figure, Sufi figure in Punjab even at that time, 300 years before Guru Nanak. So if he went to Jerusalem, he would have gone to that place. And that is why I spent a lot of time in that place. But unfortunately, we'll have to leave it to more diligent researchers to actually find some documentation for that.
So this conviction of yours finds a place in this book, Indian at Herod's Gate?
it mentions it in passing as a question. That did he come here? I don't know.
Yeah. So now this hospice is being managed by the family of the fellow who set it up.
Well, it started in the 12th century when Baba Farid went there. Then his followers started going there, and they got the land as waqf. And then through the centuries, it was added on by different sheikhs who would be the director of the hospice, so to speak, or the person who runs the hospice. Hospice is like a dharamsala, and Jerusalem is full of dharamsalas like this. So there is the Swiss hospice, there's the Russian hospice, there's the Uzbek hospice, there's the Afghan hospice, the Austrian hospice. So similarly, Indian Sufis used to go, because Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is the third most revered place for Islam after Mecca, Medina. So they used to always go there. So the director or the sheikh would succeed each other through the centuries. Then it fell into disuse for about 2-3 centuries, until the beginning of, after Jerusalem was freed from the Ottomans in 1918, a delegation of Muslims, notables, came from Jerusalem to India to take money from the rich Indian princes to go and repair the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And when they were here, they told the Indian Muslim leaders like Ajmal Khan and Dr. Ansari, etc., that there is this Indian place, why don't you send someone there to take care of it? So they sent one Sheikh Nazir Ansari from Saharanpur and said, you go and take care of it. So Sheikh Saab went there. He left his wife and 2 daughters here. He went there. He married a Palestinian woman and then he married 2-3 other Indians, including 2 Indians. And then he had this large family, but he entirely repaired the hospice. And during the second, and pilgrims started going again and staying there. During the Second World War, Indian soldiers used it as a R&R place. And thereafter, the hospice has gone through different phases. In 1967, it got bombed in the Arab-Israeli war. But now it is again run. This director is still the son of that sheikh. He is well into his 80s. And it's a family which holds Indian passports. They fly the Indian flag on 7,000 square yards in a very, very contested old Jerusalem. And it's a grand place. And they have several rooms there where you can go and stay with hardly any charge. And now there's not so many pilgrims, but writers, artists, poets go and visit there and stay there. So it's still run in technically by still Indian family, although they're half Palestinian.
Thank you. Okay, Cauvery, now we come to your latest masterpiece, The Tainted. And when are we going to get it in India? Please tell us something about it. It seems very interesting. Set in 20 and 80 and started in Jalandhar. Then you moved to Nilgiris. Nilgiris is such a lovely place, and you find Anglo-Indians there. And, I've spent a year there doing a course in next to Kunur, a place called Wellington. And so let's. I mean, I don't want to take the wind out of the sail because it has to. But the plot of The Tainted.
Kansab, that's what the book looks like. I think the Indian edition will have a different cover. So it's going to be out in India, late December, early January, and it's being published by Speaking Tiger in India. The Tainted is the story. It's the fictionalized retelling of the mutiny of the Connaught Rangers. They were very, very famous regiment in Ireland, and they were stationed in India in 1920. And when they were in India, the Irish Catholic soldiers in that regiment, they mutinied because of what was happening in Ireland, with Ireland's own freedom struggle. So my book is loosely based on the mutiny, but mainly I talk about the aftermath of the mutiny, because a lot of Irish men left behind children, over the 300 years of the British Raj. there were so many Irishmen served, in civil life, as administrators, as traders, in tea companies, jute companies, but they also were in many, many Irish regiments, which were part of the British Raj. So, a lot of Anglo-Indians can trace their paternal line to Irishmen. So, though I didn't intend to write about Anglo-Indians, but as I started the story, this happens so often to a lot of people writing fiction. You start with one intention, and then the characters just sort of, take over the book, and then they take you down a completely different path. And that's kind of what happened to me. I intended to write this story very detailed about the mutiny itself, but I ended up actually, the mutiny is only the start of the book. The bulk of the book is about what happened after the mutiny, and the fate of so many, children that were fathered by Irishmen, over many years. But of course, in the book, I'm dealing with one specific family. And I think, I hope I've done it justice. I hope I've, given voice to, the Anglo-Indian community who, have been sort of not very well treated in India over these years. And yet, so many of us were educated by them, were taught by them. They ran our railways. They ran. They were so much part of modern India, and yet they weren't really very well treated because they were mixed race. So, I mean, I hope this book, brings that the question of mixed race people, into conversation, both in India and in Ireland, because even in Ireland, in modern Ireland now, there are, like, for example, my own children. I know, they're grown up now, and I know my grandchildren will be of mixed race, because I know my children, they're dating Irish people, and I'm assuming at some stage, they'll have their own children, and I will have mixed race grandchildren. So for me, this, all the issues that are tackled in the book are very, very personal. They were never, I never started the book, for it to be like that, but it's ended up being, very close to the issues that are going to, I'll have to confront, and my children will have to confront.
Okay, great. We wish you Godspeed. The hope this book is as popular as the earlier two, and even more. And I must tell you that both of you are here for your talent, your intellect, and your achievements, and I am here because of my erstwhile profession, to ensure discipline and make sure that in these 40 minutes we pack up everything. So we have a question, Navtej. We want to know about this wonderful piece that you've written, The Exile. And somehow this untold story over a period of time about Maharaja Dalip Singh has been unraveled by you in a very wholesome manner. Though people are writing parts of it about Maharani Jindal and all, could we tell us about? And I'm very anxious to know about the story of Kohinoor.
Well, that's the book with its recently rejacketed cover. But yes, this book was, it was a long time in the making, and it was a story which one had heard of. As you said, everybody sort of hears about this person, but everybody has different views about him. And when I started looking for him in history books, I found that he was merely a footnote, and mostly written by Britishers, and in a rather patronizing manner, he was referred to as a kind of a buffoon, a womanizer, a drunkard, who, various people. And even in our own country and in Punjab, there are very mixed views. A lot of people said that, this guy changed his religion, useless chap, he got converted and all that stuff. But I was very intrigued by the personality of Dalip Singh, and the unfortunate circumstances in which he was basically became a plaything in a large political set piece. And he actually, so then I started digging up and reading more. And then I thought the best way of telling the story was a novel, because in that I could bring the emotions, I could bring his psychology, and I picked different narrators who it's mostly are all real people, but there's some of their minor characters and their roles have been expanded, like Mangla, who was Maharani Jindan's slave girl, one of her slave girls. She's been given a big role, and she saw him as a child and what happened. So, and then his valet, Arur Singh, who again is a bit role in history, but here he gets a bigger role. So I tried to then everywhere it's in these different voices. It tells his story. It adds the emotional and psychological dimensions, but it doesn't change any history. So all the dates are correct, all the events are true to history, all and a lot of the conversations are also actually based on his letters. So they've been converted into conversations. So this story, essentially, he was a young child when the British annexed Punjab, and they annexed it by a whole series of deceptions, Lord Dalhousie, etc. And when they took away the Tosha Khana, along with that, they took the Kohinoor. And he sort of signed it off as part. He was a child, so they signed a treaty of annexation in which he gives away the Kohinoor because he had no choice. And then Dalhousie sort of stuck it into his belt, a special belt which is of chamois leather, which his wife had prepared for him, and he stuck it into it personally and traveled under great security from there to Bombay, and then sent it off to Queen Victoria. So that is how the Kohinoor left India. Dalip Singh does see it once again in Buckingham Palace when he's posing for that famous portrait by Winterhalter, which you all see of Dalip Singh, showing him as a very tall, handsome man. And then Queen Victoria actually wanted to show him the Kohinoor, and she showed him the Kohinoor, by which time it had been cut and chopped by diamond cutters, because the European idea of a diamond was very different than an Indian idea. Oriental idea of a diamond was bigger the better. And the European idea was how much does it shine? So they cut off several carats of that precious diamond and made it shine. So he did see it again, but then it went off into the Queen's crown and so on and so forth. It's a very, very touching, tragic story but he does recover his personality. He does rebel. Again, he's a late hero. He rebels. He gives up Christianity. He converts to Sikhism again. He tries to launch a conspiracy with the Germans, the Russians, the French, all sorts of people. Of course, he fails, and ultimately he dies in a rather dismal circumstances, alone in a hotel in Paris.
That's it should be an interesting read for everybody. It is catching steam now. Before we end this session, your writings, actually speaking, these are frankly tracing footsteps, are an inspiration to the younger lot wanting to enter the literary world. How would you, guide towards motivation, and how does one ignite the creativity in oneself? I a few words from both of you for the younger lot. Cauvery, please.
Okay. Kansab, what I would say is that, for any young writer starting out, first of all is, you need to really read a lot. You need to be a really good reader. Read as much as you can. And I was just saying this yesterday elsewhere as well, that, you have to give up being a literary snob and read every kind of book. I think the more you read in every kind of genre, whether it's history or whether it's thrillers or comics or, any kind of book is what is my advice. And I think that's where you start. You start, your writing career starts by being a big reader. That's one thing. And the other thing I'd quickly say is that, there are stories actually all around you, even in your own family history. So, there's fiction that can be written out of any of those little nuggets that you might glean from your grandparents or uncles and aunts. There are stories particularly in India, the stories all around you. So that would be my little bit of advice.
Thank you. And Navtej?
Well, I think the first thing was exactly what Cauvery has said: read, read, and read, because until you read, you can't write. I mean, that's the first thing. That's a given. And I think the second thing was, again, the second point, that there are stories all around you. I just share one very small anecdote, which when I was searching for a subject of my first novel and my little book on folktales of Poland had come up and was being launched at the Polish embassy, I saw an old gentleman sitting quietly in one corner. And somebody nudged me and said, "That's Mulkraj Anand." So Mulk Raj Anand was sitting there. I had no idea how he had come there. He had come to that launch. So I went up to him and introduced myself and said, "I want to write a novel, but I don't know what to write about." This was way back in 1991. And he said, "Write simple thing." He said, "Write about yourself." And I said, "Myself? But everybody says you shouldn't write about yourself." He said, "If you can't write about yourself, how can you write about anybody else?" And he left it at that. And ultimately, I think that's what happens. You have to write you have to write about things you know best. And then you get the authenticity and you get the feel of what you're writing. You can't write about something which you don't know. So I'll leave it at that.
Very much. It's been such a pleasure interacting with both of you, and I'm sure our viewers, though there are some questions, but I think we are running out of time, and I am slightly intrigued by one observation which I had with one of Cauvery's interviews. She says, "When I'm playing golf, I am thinking about my piece." I'm intrigued because if I take my mind off the ball when I'm playing, my opponents lynch me. So I want to get to know how this happens. This can't happen. This gardening I can understand. You see, but golf, oh my God, it's meditation. Thank you very much, both of you. It's a pleasure, and we wish you from the CLS side Godspeed in all your future endeavors. May a lot of works from you come about, fiction from Cauvery and wide canvas of work. Navtej, thank you. Nice of you to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Saab. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.